Good evening, I'm Atikameck. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin with a follow-up to a story we brought you last week. Last Thursday, Nahanni Fontaine, Manitoba's Minister for Gender Equality, organized an event for Indigenous women graduating high school and post-secondary institutions. Fontaine, who is also the Minister for Accessibility, has since received criticism for comments she made about the American Sign Language interpreter who shared the stage with other speakers for the event. Soon after Fontaine's speech and in front of reporters and cameras, Fontaine told her ministry aide the ASL interpreter was distracting and shouldn't be on stage. Here's what Minister Fontaine said last week and the reaction it has since caused.
It was okay, I was thrown off, it wasn't great, but because the woman, she shouldn't have been on the stage, I couldn't see anybody on the side, and all I could see her was her
frantic hand?
Yeah, so I'm like, why are they on the stage? Jesus, I'm like, you need to realize.
Deaf Manitobans have since demanded the provincial government commit to improving accessibility measures at events. Recent college graduate Deborah Osher and her daughter Stephanie Jeb were at the ceremony. They say the event was positive and exciting at first, until they saw Minister Fontaine ask the ASL interpreter to leave the stage right before her now viral comments. They say those comments hurt even more because they had to organize for an interpreter to even be present at the event, after repeatedly asking the government to hire one and receiving no response. They say the Red River College provided the interpreter's service so that they and other deaf or hard of hearing attendees could be fully included in the celebration.
We were kind of like, what's going on? Why is the interpreter leaving the stage? The event's not done. And then the interpreter told us that she had been told, demanded was the word that was used, to step down from the stage. So we were kind of looking at each other, and we both, there was just a bit of a feeling of shock, like, wait a second, did this just happen? We never experienced someone doing that like in the middle of an event, right? Like just walking up to them on the stage and making them move. Like I've never seen that before. And Deborah's saying it was so strange. There's this moment of you're feeling inspired. We talked about empowerment, and then boom, all of a sudden the feeling shifts.
And we will have more on their story and their calls for justice tomorrow in our evening newscast. Ontario's Special Investigations Unit has wrapped up its report into the death of a First Nations man fatally shot by an OPP officer in Kenora 1 year ago. The incident happened at Anishinaabe Park and resulted in the death of 57-year-old Bruce Frog, a member of Wawakapawain First Nation who was living in Kenora at the time. The SIU says they interviewed police and civilian witnesses and examined video footage that captured the incident. SIU says an employee of the park first contacted police at noon to report a male had poured gas or oil on himself and was pushing a cart of wood and containers of flammable liquid. By the time the first officer arrived 5 minutes later, the SIU says the office building was on fire and Frog had a machete in each hand. At 12:22 p.m., an officer fired 3 shots as Frog began walking towards firefighters and a group of officers. The SIU report quotes the officer as later saying, "I don't know if that was the right call." Frog died later that day in hospital. The SIU concluded there was no grounds to believe an OPP officer committed a criminal offense in connection with his death. Frog was described by First Nations leaders and family as an avid outdoorsman, remembered for his teachings and stories about the land. Anishinaabe Nation, which represents 49 First Nations in Northern Ontario, says it rejects the findings of the report, clearing police in the shooting death of Bruce Frog in Kenora. Among the issues raised by NAN Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler is a lack of analysis in the report on Frog's state of mind at the time, how his mental state could have led to his actions, or how officers are trained to respond to a person in emotional crisis. In his statement, Fiddler says, "We believe the SIU's investigation has raised more questions than answers, and that this process is severely flawed. We are working closely with the family and community to explore other avenues for justice. People in Ministuin Lake Cree Nation in northwestern Saskatchewan are mourning the loss of a community member after a dog attack killed a woman over the weekend. And a warning, some of the details in this story are disturbing. According to Saskatchewan RCMP, the woman died Saturday night. A community member told APTN News the woman was mauled by a dog or dogs in Ministuin Lake Cree Nation. The incident happened at 9:40 p.m. and Loon Lake RCMP were called for what they say was a medical emergency. Paramedics later declared the woman deceased on scene. Hannah Lacombe told APTN News the woman suffered terrible injuries, including a severed arm. Lacombe says this isn't the first time a severe dog attack has happened in Ministuin, and said last year a man was seriously mauled by dogs and lost both of his ears. She also said children have been previously attacked by dogs and left with serious injuries. Lacombe says leadership is meeting with a lawyer to determine what to do next. She hopes new rules or decisions are made as a result will not come from a place of fear, panic, or liability. In a statement to APTN News, Lacombe added, "Each time these attacks happen, nothing meaningful changes. The only response our leadership and council ever give is to send an unqualified person to drive around and shoot dogs at random. No proper assessments are made which animals are truly dangerous, which are people's pets, or which are strays that could be helped. This is not a solution. It is a reaction that does nothing to protect our people or our community." APTN News reached out to Ministuin leadership, but have yet to hear back. You can read more about this story by Leanne Sanders by going to aptnnews.ca. Teepees were recently set up to remind loggers that they're entering Atikameck ancestral territory in Quebec. APTN News spoke with the guardian of the territory, Dave Petitquay, who has been involved in multiple blockades in Wematachi over the last few years. He shares how Quebec's Bill 97 is another example of First Nations not being invited to the table to discuss legislation that will affect their territory. APTN's Savannah Craig reports.
On vient planter un tipi ici, pour que tout le monde le voie. C'est la route 25. Le chemin principal est au 62.
Dave Petitquay is protecting Atikameck ancestral territory from the threat of Bill 97. He's putting up teepees to prevent loggers from passing the roads, a response to this legislation that began in the spring after Bill 97 was tabled in late April. The bill is seen by the provincial government as a way to modernize the forestry regime.
L'autre là-bas est souvent écrasé. Il y a un malin qui passe tout le temps, il l'écrase, mais on va voir s'il va grimper ici.
Petitquay says he moved the teepees onto a hill overlooking the roads that logging trucks drive through after the teepees kept being taken down on those same roads. Now it remains as a symbolic gesture that loggers are not welcome.
C'est un exercice de souveraineté ancestrale. On a pas mal, je n'ai pas compté, mais on a pas mal dans le territoire où c'est fermé.
For Petitquay, Bill 97 is another example of First Nations being left out of provincial decisions.
Arrête de négocier entre eux et qui viennent négocier avec les vrais représentants du territoire, les gardiens du territoire.
Petitquay staged a blockade against logging in Wematachi, both in the spring and winter of 2023, after he said community members weren't consulted by the provincial government. Now he says this is happening again.
Cette table a été mise en place à la suite du dépôt.
Earlier this month, Regional Chief for the Assembly of First Nations Quebec and Labrador went to Quebec's National Assembly to urge the government to abandon the bill. The Minister of Natural Resources and Forests, Maïté Blanchette-Vézina, instead welcomed First Nations to the table to rewrite the bill alongside her.
Les blocus, c'est pas permis dans le sens où c'est des chemins qui sont publics. Donc, il est important que le droit soit respecté, mais on tolère certaines activités de manifestation. C'est pour ça qu'elle est là encore. Ceci étant, la solution de prendre des communautés, des travailleurs en otage, c'est pas le moyen à utiliser. On a une table pour discuter.
But Petitquay says otherwise.
Non, pas pour nous autres, en tout cas pour Mamou, Première Nation et les gardiens de territoire. Ils veulent carrément pas nous avoir dans des tables. Ils nous disent d'aller dans des tables de négociation, mais où? Hein? Où aller? Qui veut nous écouter? Le ministre ne veut pas nous écouter. Pourtant, nous, on va se tenir jusqu'à temps qu'il nous écoute. Il n'y aura pas le choix.
Pettiquet says Bill 97 is not only about the issue of logging on their ancestral territory, but it's also about removing trees that the Atikameck have traditionally foraged medicines from.
Qui vient écraser les végétations non commerciales. Ça, c'est le monde l'oublie. Ils veulent enlever le bois qui est non commercial pour le remplacer, pour qu'il y ait plus de rentabilité sur le territoire. C'est ça comme ça qu'ils voient. Fait que les plantes médicinales, tous les arbres qu'on a besoin pour nos coutumes ancestrales, ils vont être éliminés pour remplacer par du pin gris. C'est sûr aussi nos droits ancestraux sont brimés là-dedans.
Savannah Craig, APTN National News, Atikameck territory of Wematashi.
We have another update on Canada's controversial Bill C-5. That bill has just passed by the Senate last week, and now there is talks of an upcoming meeting between Canada's Prime Minister and Indigenous leadership. That interview when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Bill C-5 was slammed through Parliament last week, becoming law before the Canada Day July 1st deadline Prime Minister Mark Carney had previously set. First Nations are upset over the passage of this bill, and there have been demonstrations in Ottawa and Toronto hoping to stop the bill. The federal government has promised to meet with all Indigenous groups about the legislation this month, but at the moment, details of those meetings are very slim. To explain more, we're joined by our APTN senior online reporter, Karen Pugliese. Karen, thank you so much for making some time for us. Can we start off by you reminding our viewers what is specifically upsetting Indigenous groups with regards to this recent bill passed by the Senate?
Oh, we might need a longer show. I'll try to get through the list as quickly as I can. Like, listen, I mean, first of all, there was very little pre-consultation on the bill. And when people saw the bill for the first time, they just had so many questions about it. Essentially, the bill is meant to speed up energy projects so that they can get created and operating, like get through the approvals process in 2 years or less, which is much faster than what happens now. And so they had a lot of questions about, well, what does that mean for consultation? What does that mean for environmental protections? Can the science even be done in that amount of time? And for Indigenous communities that already feel under pressure, what kind of time pressure is that going to be on them? And will they be fully consulted in a meaningful way like they want to? So there were a lot of questions like that about the bill. And then there were some things about the language of the bill. There's no non-derogation clause in the beginning of it, which is customary in bills where First Nations rights or Indigenous rights might be impacted. There's some language in there that was kind of a little wonky, where it says they'll consult Indigenous peoples whose rights may be adversely affected by the carrying out of the project. So there's that kind of kind of language in there all the time that it's just like maybe, might be. And it's very different for the provinces. There was an amendment made that says there's the written consent of a province or territory is required when a project passes through that province or territory. The same is not there for Indigenous people. Then there's a bunch of regulations, environmental protections, etc., that Cabinet can skip. And it doesn't specifically say why they would skip it, but just that they can decide to skip it. And that includes some things like wildlife assessment acts, impact assessment act, those kind of things. So all of that were problems with the bill itself. Then it's rushed through in 2 weeks. So it goes before the House. There were 3 Indigenous leaders, the national chief of the AFN, the president of the ITK, and the president of the MMF were the only ones who got to speak to the bill, and they got to speak to it once. It went through a bunch of amendments. They never got back to be able to say how they felt about those amendments or what was happening on the final bill before it passed. And a bunch of leaders, particularly from Ontario, there was about a dozen chiefs that showed up. that wanted to testify and do witness before the Transport Committee. They were given a time, and then it was taken away, and they were told there was no time to actually consult them on the bill. So people have a variety of things that they're upset about.
Karen, there is talks of a meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Indigenous groups to help set things straight. Can you explain, when did that idea for the meeting first come up and why?
Yeah, it came up after third reading. I think because of a lot of pressure, there was a lot of criticism over the lack of consultations on the bill and what consultations are going to look like going forward. So that came up the Friday that it passed on June 20th. Prime Minister Carney came out and said there was going to be like 3 summits. And one of the summits is supposed to be July the 1st, July 17th, with First Nations rights holders and leaders and experts, and that's going to happen in Ottawa, and he's going to be there with his ministers. There'll be another one in July with Inuit leaders, and another one to follow at some date in the future with Métis leaders.
And so far, Karen, what are some of the details about this meeting?
Yeah, there aren't any. That's all we know. That is what the Prime Minister said. Minister Mandy Galmasti was there along with him, the Indigenous Services Minister, and she said they've been talking about this quite a lot behind the scenes at Cabinet, but actually just hadn't made it public. This is a very short time to pull this all together. Because if you're talking about Indigenous right holders being present, like just for First Nations leaders, that would be 633 leaders that have to get to Ottawa by July 17th. And we didn't get any answers out of the Privy Council, who are organizing this so far, about who's going to be included. But a source close to the Privy Council told us that they don't have a list yet. They guest list. They don't have a venue set up, and everything seems very preliminary.
Karen, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
In Winnipeg, the Manitoba Métis Federation unveiled a new collection of Red River Métis cultural items acquired for its Heritage Centre. It's called the Grandmother Collection, and it includes 142 Red River Métis cultural items dating back as far as the 1830s. The announcement was made at a Wednesday event commemorating the reopening of Winnipeg's Portage and Main intersection. The Red River Métis saw that as an opportunity to establish a stronger presence downtown. The collection includes beadwork, quill work, embroidery, and weaving applied on items ranging from clothing to fire bags. The MMF worked with Métis artist and writer Gregory Schofield to acquire the collection. Today, a selection of items including a beaded jacket, octopus bag, and sash was unveiled. A permanent home will be in the Red River Métis National Heritage Centre, which is set to open in 2027. MMF President David Chartrand said investing in artifacts will help preserve Métis stories and bring history to life.
We spent close to $1 million already on artifacts, and we're going to spend more. We have a lot of our citizens themselves trying to donate stuff to us that they got from their great-grandmothers and great-great-grandfathers. So people are donating stuff to us too. So we got to look at, but again, just lay out the curator is going to lay out the story. And these collections you see here today date back to 1830 and forward. Some of them might trickle into 1820, 1815. But again, but it tells a story of the people and who they were and how proud they were.
We have photo of the day, weather, and more stories for you when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. This idyllic scene from the Papikassis Cree Nation in Saskatchewan was sent in by Jean Stonechild, from a teepee to an old shed and a modern children's bicycle, all within a forested setting. Thanks for that, Jean. Send us your photos to share at aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. On the east, St. John 17 in rain, Charlottetown 23 in rain. 17 in Cartwright, La Grande River 22. Montreal 26 in rain, Quebec City 25. Ottawa 28, Sarnia sunny there and 28. 23 in Timmins, Sioux Lookout 23. Churchill 20, Thompson 22. 27 in Winnipeg and Sun, Barons River 23. Saskatoon 26, Regina 26. 24 in La Ronge, Buffalo Narrows 24. 24 in High Level, Grand Prairie 25. 29 in Lethbridge, 31 in Medicine Hat and Sun. Sunny in Tofino at 22, Penticton 33. Fort Nelson 25, Dease Lake 19 in rain. Watson Lake partly cloudy and 21, Mayo 22. 24 in Trout Lake, Norman Wells 25. 18 in Fort McPherson, Polituck 14. 18 in Baker Lake, Chesterfield 16. And Iqaluit 12, Arctic Bay 6. After several months of planning, sketching, and finally painting, Indigenous students at a Northern Ontario high school have completed a mural, which they hope will inspire generations of students to come. The mural is one of many art projects overseen by local woodland-style artist Lucia LaForde. APTN's Mike McDonald reports.
It took a lot of work and several layers of paint, but what was once a simple white wall at St. Mary's College has been transformed into a vibrant display of color and culture. Woodland-style artist Lucia LaForde says each day of work on the mural began with some type of cultural activity.
There's about 16 students throughout the whole entire project, and first we just started with ideas. We talked about woodland art, we talked about teachings, we drummed together, we smudged every time we met, and we just talked about the story that they wanted to tell.
And after weeks of discussion and concept drawings, the group decided on a design.
We finally came up with one final idea that really centered around the 7 grandfather teachings, their care for the environment. They wanted to talk about the themes of, loss, resilience, all the things that Indigenous students face.
LaForde says the mural is not just a celebration of culture, it's a legacy.
We're talking about how Indigenous students need to find pride in themselves. They need to understand that they have the capability of doing really hard things. And something that's in our blood as Anishinaabe is art and sharing stories. And one beautiful way to do that is through woodland-style art. And so the whole purpose of this mural was to, create a community where we're learning and growing and teaching each other. I'm not just teaching them, they're teaching me. And to be able to tell the story that's not just going to be here for them, but for the future generations of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students that are at the school.
LaForde is working on other mural projects involving public institutions, including Ontario Lottery and Gaming, Service Canada, and the local Social Services Building. Mike McDonald, APTN National News, Sault Ste. Marie.
That's your evening newscast for this Wednesday. We're back again for your daytime newscast at 12 p.m. Winnipeg time tomorrow. Please join us then. From our HQ in Winnipeg, hi miigwech masicho. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again. Ekse.